Welcome to the Scroll Ensemble Classical Music Improvisation channel. I'm Robert, and in this video I wanted to tell you about a 2.5 hours lecture that you can watch on our Patreon. I will include an overview and some parts of the actual video in this video, and the talk was originally and in a shorter version done as one of the early music seminars at the Conservatoire of The Hague. Having looked at more than 200 methods from the 19th century, I have found small puzzle pieces of improvisation inspiration. And when we put all of these together, we can start constructing our own improvisation pedagogy, steeped in historical information. So this lecture focuses on showing a lot of information and giving key points to get started on different types of improvisation in the 19th century. But obviously it is in no way a course in improvisation. So you can watch this video either by buying it separately or by joining our Paganini tier. And both these things can be done and found on Patreon. And there will be a link below. Just a few words about our new Paganini tier. Every month you'll be able to watch a full lecture or get access to workshop materials that were used in real life or in closed settings, and therefore are inaccessible elsewhere. It will obviously not replace the real-life experience, where you could ask questions or participate with specific and personal guidance from me. But it's probably the next best thing. To get things started, I'm presenting this 2.5 hours lecture to really make it a festive affair, but in general the presentations will be more like 30 minutes or consist of workshop materials with short explanatory videos. I'm a little bit behind real life, as recording this lecture took a lot more time than I had expected. From April on, not everything is set in stone yet, and new things are bound to come in, so these ones here may still change a little bit. So previously I have mostly researched Baroque practices, but what about the 19th century? To find out more about this, we could start off with Dana Gooley's fantastic book, Fantasies of Improvisation. In the introduction, Gooley describes how improvisation was still a normal part of music's life up until about 1830. Preludes, theme and variations, cadenzas, ornamentation and freer fantasias were still staple diets. And Gooley then finds a decline into 1850. And a dying out from then on. On the other hand, several early 20th century recordings still bear witness of actual improvisatory practices, such as additions to Chopin's nocturnes by his students, a recording of Brahms improvising, or vocal ornamentation and cadenzas in music by Rossini and Bizet. So far in this story we have mainly heard the names of piano players, so apparently they still improvised, of course also the organ players, maybe some singers. But what about me? What about other instruments? But then I remembered I have come across some mentions of improvising wind players in the 19th century. For example, Egisto Mosel was mentioned in the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung to be improvising, and at a time when improvisation supposedly is already almost gone from the concert stages. Definitely not the moment for an oboist to start improvising something. So, what did he do? And is there a way for me to learn to do this as well? I wanted to know more about what people might learn when they learn to play their instruments. On instruments like mine, or the flute, the clarinet, bassoon, etc., did people learn anything about improvisation, even maybe at the start of their process? When I started looking, I would sometimes find these small bits of interest, like you can see here on the right. A page from a clarinet method by Ber with some modulations for preluding. It doesn't say how these modulations should then be used to make an actual prelude, and there are no examples of preludes in this particular method by Ber either. So I started collecting these puzzle pieces, and taking all of these puzzle pieces together, we can start constructing an improvisation pedagogy unexpected as it may seem. In this talk, I want to look at methods that give us puzzle pieces for 5 modes of improvisation. These are loosely based on Gouli's book, where Gouli focuses on the last category, the free fantasy. So let's dive in with interpretation, essential ornaments, and free ornamentation. We'll first discuss how improvisation could play a role in any piece of music from the 19th century in terms of its interpretation. And then there's a big section on the different ornaments we might find in the 19th century, the essential ornaments like trills, appoggiaturas, and some examples of sources telling us we could also improvisatorially add them. Finally, an even bigger section on free ornamentation. I will discuss many sources and their methods to teach you about ornamentation, and finally we'll discuss cadenzas, as they are often part of the discussion of ornaments. Bourdieu also seems to use this ornament especially on metrically important notes, when it comes to choosing which of the repeated notes to add the gruppetto to. Then we can also add them between the first and second note of a melodic formula. And anyway, in this type of dotted rhythms, it seems to be added quite often, and perhaps to add itself almost automatically. Improvisation has always been a part of church music, and such practices were still present in the 19th century. A popular approach was cantare super librum, where singers would improvise multiple other vocal parts looking at a singular chant in a book, or counterpoint. For more information on cantare super librum, you can watch the Early Music Sources video or follow Tim Braithwaite's website Cacophony. What I was interested in was the more surprising use of especially the serpent and ophicleide, two wind instruments, and so that will be the focus of this section. This is another interactive moment. Here I asked the students, many of whom have had some basic tuition in this, to imagine how they would improvise a counterpoint to this. These are the first 4 notes from a Stabat Mater Dolorosa, which is generally seen as quite a sad piece. You could pause the video now and come up with an idea yourself for a counterpoint below these 4 notes. And let's see what happens. So here's the anonymous serpent method where I found this Stabat Mater. Of course, it is meant as a practice piece, and there's no indication that this is how they would have performed or improvised it in an actual church service. Nevertheless, I think it gives an interesting view of what could have happened, also with these extra chromatics here in the second line. Let's have a little listen. Accompaniment is an interesting topic that may perhaps not excite the freest of improvisers, but it is part of a culture inherited from the 18th century and was definitely still present in the 19th century. Fellow teacher, keyboardist, and extraordinary improviser Bert Moijman, who, by the way, also wrote a 500-plus page thesis on the topic of 19th century improvisation, so definitely check that out, inspired me to think about this topic more deeply, especially with a focus on how to accompany starting from an unaccompanied melody, rather than the more bass-focused 18th century approaches. And also a video interview with Bert Moijman can be found on the YouTube channel if that should interest you. We have now arrived at the chapter about traveling virtuosi, who improvised to make connections in new places and find favor with larger audiences. In this chapter I will talk about improvising simple preludes, variations, and the potpourri. The prelude is interesting in light of these different modes of improvisation that we've been talking about, as it's one of the forms that sort of exists on the meeting point of all of these different modes. Preluding was done by beginning students in a lesson, as well as the most evolved soloist in a concert, or as the intonation of a church musician. Then finally, let's have a quick look at the potpourri. It's actually part of the Fantasia section in Czerny's book, but I will talk about it here because it is so clearly part of the virtuoso improviser's repertoire. The potpourri combines different melodies from famous arias and other music well known to a broad audience, and was therefore, according to Czerny, the best type of improvisation for bigger audiences, where you may not be completely sure of what they know, of what kind of styles they liked, and how deeply they will understand your modulations and more complicated improvisations. The potpourri may also be called réminiscence, souvenir, or amusement, and interestingly, I found only few examples of this in the actual methods so far. So maybe there are more in some of the piano methods that I haven't looked at yet as much. Here's an example for clarinet solo, and it's really interesting, I think. It's from his amusement, which are intended as pedagogical pieces, but are not actually a method. I've written here the different pieces that appear in the potpourri. As Czerny suggests, some melodies are featured with one or two variations, but many melodies just appear as a bridge from one to the other, or even as bridge material, where a motif is taken and developed for a few bars to get from one place to the next. So here is an example of this bit from Mozart. That is then used here to modulate and take us to this new place, to a new piece. If you are a clarinetist and can help me identify some of the repertoire referred to here, I'd be very happy for it. You can see that especially the Spoor, I have no idea where it comes from, even though I looked through all of IMSLP, but well, no luck so far. We have reached the final chapter. This one is about free improvisation as per the categories in Gooley's book, which I mentioned at the beginning, and in fact the topic of that book specifically. The free improvisation was a form, or consists of different forms that were used in more intimate settings, especially where the audience would be probably even aware of the composer, the improviser, and their way of improvising, and would be really interested in all the intricate things they would do to the motifs. I will first have a look expanding what we have learned so far based on the methods that were the northern star of this presentation, and then I will take Czerny's Anweisung zum Fantasieren as a starting point, where I replace his examples with examples from oboe methods or other wind methods to construct a possible method to learn to fantasize. Finally, I also discuss 3 types of improvisation methods which are focused solely on improvisation or improvisatory forms. Finally, I will talk for a little bit about some methods and publications that are actually aimed at improvisation. Several have already made appearances throughout this presentation, but I think it makes sense to very shortly give you a little bit of an idea of what is out there. The reasons for bringing this in this late have also appeared before already, mainly that these improvisation sources mostly focus on keyboard instruments and that they could be seen as specialist publications, whereas my interest was with sources that were widespread and aimed at the education of a specific instrument generally. These sources fall into 3 different categories, and I will show a list of each with a little explanation. As I have said throughout, it is especially these that I would love to spend entire videos on in the future, so more of that is definitely to come. And if you want to keep track of what I'm doing with these 19th century improvisation methods and other researches, you could also have a look at this playlist. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, do that because I'm hoping to make more videos soon.